It's officially been 3 years since I began the development of my first commercial game. It's a story-based first-person shooter that, unfortunately, still doesn't have a name. It's been a pretty awesome journey, and I thought I'd share the last 3 years of development in this one video. Although the development of this game started 3 years ago, the idea to make a first-person shooter has always been on my mind. Back in 2020, I set out to complete a game development challenge where I tried to make an FPS.
I'm about to make a game in only 5 days.
As a middle schooler with almost no game development experience, I thought it would be smart to try and make a game in less than a week, and to put things kindly, I got cooked. I had tried to make a first-person shooter, and as you can probably tell, the abomination I created barely qualified as a game. The code came from various tutorials, the models were ripped right off the internet, and the gameplay was pretty bad. I didn't even know how to code, or model, or animate, and was just copy-pasting every second thing I saw on the internet. Besides that, the game had no objective, and the player couldn't even die.
You are trash!
But regardless, as a young kid, I honestly thought what I had made was a masterpiece. Even though the game was very questionable, it honestly made me really excited to continue game development. A few months later, I returned to the 5-day challenge, and I thought it would be cool to try and improve every aspect of the game. I updated the weapons, created a main menu, and then, out of nowhere, I discovered Unity's glorious post-processing.
You are my sunshine, my only.
Up until this point, I thought graphics completely relied on the physical environment, but all of a sudden, by changing a couple values, I could make the game look so cinematic, so beautiful, so majestic. I spent the next few days playing around with the post-processing and just turning it on and off so I could see the before and after. I currently think the post-processing was a little extreme, but old me loved what he saw. However, my technical skills were still absolute trash, and despite my best efforts, I could barely add anything to the game. After a week of trying to create enemies, all I could get them to do was look at the player. But yeah, after that, I decided it was time to move on from this little test project I had created. Deep down, however, I knew I really wanted to create a commercial first-person shooter, and after nearly a year, that's exactly what I did. It was early 2022, and I decided to actually try and make a proper first-person shooter. And this is where development really began. Back then, the game even had a name, so I guess it's gotten worse since then. Now, the YouTube videos still sucked, but when it came to the game, there were some clear improvements. There was a main menu, a set of sci-fi weapons which I really like even now, and the visuals of the game had approached a more sci-fi aesthetic. Unfortunately for me, slapping copyrighted hip-hop music over a screen recording of the game didn't cover up the massive issues. There still wasn't any combat, gameplay, or objective. There just wasn't anything to do besides looking at some weapon models and a single map. And don't even get me started on the maps. I literally only made maps so I could take cool screenshots.
Huh?
There was no interactions or enemies or things to do, and it was just like... After that, I ended up taking a break from YouTube and returned after nearly a year with a massive update. The environment still looked similar, but with some more detail, better lighting, and improved post-processing. The game also had new weapons, but the new weapons didn't really fit the sci-fi aesthetic of the project. Over the next few videos, I introduced some enemies, optimized the project, and created the first detailed area, the player's base. At the time, I was actually really proud of this level. It was carefully handcrafted, very detailed, and full to the brim with the various interactions. For the first time, I actually felt like there was something to do. Shortly after, I created another important area, the in-game shop, but this level wasn't nearly as good, and it completely missed the vibe I was going for. But yeah, the weapons and graphics were updated, and I had created 2 important levels in the game. Next, I shifted my focus to enemies. Now, I know I already mentioned I made enemies, but the old lineup was just trash, so I decided to create a new set of enemies. So, over the span of 3 months, I painstakingly created better models and VFX and a more complex behavioral system, and by the end of it all, I managed to create a lineup that was just as trash as before.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no.
Basically, the game had more features with improved weapons and graphics, but there still wasn't any gameplay. The enemies sucked, and there wasn't a single level where the player could experience any resemblance of combat. Now, looking at my journey so far, it's really obvious that I was self-taught. The biggest thing that held me back was by far my inability to code, and looking back, something that would have saved so much time and strengthened my fundamentals would have been brilliant. Today's sponsor. But seriously, Brilliant is an incredible way to develop skills in math, data analysis, programming, and AI, especially with the thousands of interactive lessons they have to offer. For all their lessons, they use a principles-first approach, and each lesson is filled with hands-on problems that allow you to play around with learning concepts. Plus, all the content on Brilliant is carefully handcrafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals. If you're also interested in learning how to code, they've got a growing selection of programming courses where you can get familiar with Python and start building programs on day one with their super intuitive drag-and-drop editor. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, you can visit brilliant.org/theunityguy, scan the QR code on screen, or click the link in the description. Using these, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Now, back to the video. With the clear issue of gameplay, you'd expect that my next focus would have been on combat and enemies. Unfortunately, as you can probably tell by this point in the video, I'm not exactly a very smart individual, and I instead spent my time improving the graphics of the game. Anyways, I tried out a more industrial style for the game, and gave it a test run by remaking the player's base and the industrial district in this new style. Now, although the levels themselves were improved, I accidentally made the game super flat and unsaturated. Like, I was trying to make the game look better, and it ended up just looking worse. After that abysmal failure, I decided to finally, for the first time in the development of this project, move on to combat. I started with gunplay, and by adding nice effects, sounds, and destruction, managed to make shooting pretty satisfying. Then, I moved on to enemies. I already messed up enemies twice, and didn't want to do it again. So, I planned each enemy out, along with all the features and attacks I wanted each of them to have. And after nearly 2 months of creating enemies, they were all trash. These new enemies weren't fun to fight, were ridiculously buggy, didn't communicate with each other, and every enemy had 8 different attacks. So now by this point, I started to realize how aimless my development had been, and decided to set my full focus on gameplay. First came level design. As I mentioned before, the game had become really unsaturated, flat, and bright. In my attempts to fix this, I began to play around with my game's post-processing, and was surprised by how much of an improvement this made. After that, I created the first playable levels in the game, the story missions, which have a really sci-fi and minimalistic aesthetic. To fix how monotone my levels tend to look, I've even added some nice volumetric lights and fog. After these story missions, I created the district missions. These levels have a much more grounded style, and although my indoor environments generally turn out really bad, I honestly love what I was able to do with this level. Now, I know this was another bad idea, but I decided to remake the player's base and the industrial district, 2 levels that I had already made and remade before. Despite how dumb this was, I'm still really happy with the end result, as the layout and art style are all hugely improved. So that's level design. The next aspect of gameplay was combat. To start this off, I remade all the weapon models, VFX, and projectiles, so they actually fit the sci-fi style of the game. Then, I added a melee attack with some satisfying knockback, and also introduced a double jump and a dash. There are also a ton of other combat-related features that are currently in the works, but I'll be saving those for the next video. So yeah, that's been the last 3 years of development. I'm sure you just wanted to crash out watching me remake the same levels for the 100th time, but it's just a testament to how I'm just starting out as a game developer and still have a lot to learn, especially when it comes to working on a commercial game. But yeah, please subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.